sustainable and not just cash. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do we have any more time for any more comments or questions?
Thank you. We do. I think we have two questions. If we can make them short and we can make the actual questions directed to the panel and relevant to livelihoods and collaboration. So we have... Yeah, please, go ahead. So
Yes, Undersecretary Lagunsat.
Recall the series of questions. The last part is about training. Do not forget that supply doesn't create its own demand. In other words, the trainings have to be based on the requirements of the market. So we cannot just train for training's sake. Otherwise, you'll be a well-trained, unemployed laborer. So we need to look at the business within the area and the periphery. And if we know that there would be a demand, even a future demand for specific skills, then that should be the basis for training. Now, and going to the first question, is it good to have a stronger, bigger, a regular agency or a department to handle this? In concept, I agree. Remember, there are now three things that are definite in life. You cannot therefore create a super department that would incorporate all the functions of all agencies. So there needs to be a coordination. Even if you have a stable, regular, stronger organization, the secret is to coordinate well. We need to think now in terms of whole of government approaches rather than operating in silos, trying to say that we did our job well, but if you don't work with your neighbor, you have not accomplished much. So given that kind of a wicked problem, we can probably propose some kind of a structure that would be more stable, more reliable, and very good in coordination. Coordination work is the secret there. You'd have to have personalities who are able to listen, compromise, relay information, and find solutions that are acceptable to. Because between agencies, you'd have, differences. I cannot tell you how big these differences are. But if you have somebody who is able to shuttle from one agency to the other, imagine we also discuss with the panel of donors. They would have their own way of structuring intervention. So you need to listen to how they do it, but they would need information that would allow them to design their intervention. So part of the task is really to do that. But anyway, that's my response to the first question.
Thank you, Yusek. There's a question from this gentleman.
Yes, Jeff Johnson, IOM. Now, the reason I'm using that, in case what I'm going to ask will get me persona non grata, because I don't want to be kicked out as the ILO country director. I want to go back to Mayor Martinez says, and basically the topic of this conversation was about sustainability and collaboration. And what I'm worried about, and somebody who's been in this field for many decades, and as you know, I had no gray hair until I showed up in the Philippines. We have heard from mayors on the ground, and I'd like your opinion, and maybe the USEC's, was this issue about sustainability. We heard from some mayors that as soon as the international community pulls out, they are going to go back to the habits of not paying minimum wage. They're not going to pay social protection because they say they can't afford it. And as an economist looking at this, it's just the opposite. You can't afford not to. What we have is a race to the bottom again. If you allow enterprises to operate that are exploitive, your economy, your people will continue to suffer. As elected officials, what is your view about this, and what can be done to stop this practice? Because again, it's not up to us as the international community. The laws here in the Philippines are quite strong. You're a very litigious culture. I happen to know that because I'm from the US. I can tell you about litigious cultures. But the issue is, it's got to be enforcement, and these businesses have to operate equitably. And again, we're greatly concerned about this, because when we hear this from the local government about this issue, it concerns me, because if we're going to lift people out of poverty, how are we going to do that? So the question to you, Mr. Mayor, I know you're not one of them. I was in your community during the Christmas break, as you remember. We came up there and worked. I'd like to know how local governments are going to move away from this race to the bottom, and how and what support that we can require and then monitor national government. So now you can kick me out of the country, but I will be out of here by October 15th. So.
Yeah. Actually, right now, an example has been set. An example has been set. After Haiyan, yeah, people were giving work at minimum wage, regional minimum wage. And so people are expecting it already. Even now, it's 2 years after the typhoon. People are still paying, the reconstructions that are going on. People are paying minimum wage and even higher. It really depends on the skills you have. So hopefully, this will continue. Many times, I think labor is still law of supply and demand. If you have more laborers than work, then you have a problem. Because your own laborers there'll be other people that will undermine the system. But actually, the example has already been set. If you're an employee and you try to give lesser than what's been given, people complain. And I think that's the start. And so we in government, we're going to try to continue this, what has been started. We will do our best to make sure that what has been started will continue in the future. Yeah.
I have a very sad experience when implementing the programs with the ILO, specifically on the part of the municipality of Sugod, because the municipal mayor doesn't like ALU. So when they organize, or they are going to organize the workers into an association, they will ask immediately a higher wage. So what I did, I did not go to the mayor, I go to the parish priest, and I told the parish priest, we'll have to organize this, otherwise these people, if will not go to our meeting, you can issue an excommunication to these people. So, the parish priest, a good friend of mine, so we had this understanding, and we are now on the right track. But definitely, the mayor doesn't like to see my face, because I belong to an ALO, and we have been an animosity for the last 54 years. So that's the reason why they don't like ALO to be involved or to have this kind of undertaking in his or in her municipality.
Can I respond to the wage part, because that's...
Okay, sige po, Yusek Lagunsan. This will have to be the last comment because we have other activities this afternoon.
Well, certainly we'd like workers to receive at least minimum wage. But as you said, it's also part of the demand and supply. But if the market works and that they are paid because of that, then that's fine. But there will be instances where government has to intervene. And we should not tolerate sub-minimum wages. That is part of the decent work agenda. Now, but if you look at it from a total development or growth perspective, you'd expect if the area is developing and growing fast, and that the skills of workers are improving, you would see that wages will actually go up. So as a long-term policy, as a development, NEDA should be part of this, and the local government agencies, they can invite investors, they can build skills, just like what they're doing in Palo. They have sort of a zone there, and that they would require skilled labor and invite investors. Then that is the solution to higher income for workers, rather than just threatening them that if they don't pay, we'll close them down. But we can do that too. Uh, but the long-term solution, as I said, is growth and development. Thank you.
All right, with that threat, we'll close this session. It's been a very rich discussion, and we all hope that this conversation about the lessons learned from Yolanda continues. Someone was asking what good could have come from this kind of disaster. It's the lessons learned for future events like this. So we hope that we continue maybe the workshop that Yusek Lagunsad suggested on, so we can really dissect the experiences and really process all of the experiences. So thank you for listening, and thank you to our panelists, Yusek Lagunsad, Mr. Barit, Mr. Lagran, Mayor Martinez, and Mr. Ned Olme of Save the Children. Maraming salamat po.
This is the best of times. This is the worst of times. So during worst situations, we get the best out of every man. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the third panel discussion. I'd like to call on the managing editor of Forbes Philippines, Ms. Lala Rimando.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're in our last panel session for today, and I'm sure you've had a lot of lessons learned already from the past two, but the lessons that we have learned from the different disasters or events here in the Philippines and otherwise continues. For this particular panel, we're focusing on Haiyan, disaster response in Haiyan. So let me call on our panelists. Ms. Wilma Cabrera, she's the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Social Welfare and Development. Ms. Cabrera? Okay. The other panelist is Ms. Judy Frances C. She's the Senior Vice President of the Social Security System. May we also call on Mr. Walter Bacareza. He's the Regional Vice President of the Philippine Health Insurance, or PhilHealth. Hello, sir. And from the Employers Confederation of the Philippines, or ECOP, may we call on Attorney Antonio Abad Jr. He's the ECOP Governor. And the last but not the least, Honorable Leopoldo Dominico Petilla, the Governor of the Province of Leyte. All right, so our topic, okay, we have Ms. Cabrera now joining us in the panel. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So our topic for this panel is about social protection in Haiyan disaster response. You've had, I'm sure, very rich experiences from your field of work, your focus. We'd like to get a bit from you on why you think social protection is important in a disaster as big as Haiyan. May we get some few words from you? Let's start with Ms. Angsi. Ms. Judy.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Actually, social protection is very important as a mechanism for responding to risks and contingencies resulting from disasters. It is essential that the link between social protection and disaster management be strengthened. Actually, social protection instruments are considered part and parcel of the larger set of disaster management interventions, including public, private sector, community-based, or NGO schemes, and they complement each other. So collectively, they play a pivotal role in protecting and aiding the most vulnerable people in times of disaster. Social Security is actually part of the social protection scheme of the country, and under the Philippine Social Security system, workers are supposed to be contributing to the scheme as part of their insurance for contingencies arising from death or disability or any real life contingency. So it's actually part of it's actually the legal basis for this is that Social Security is mandatory for all workers. In times of disaster, their ability to contribute to the scheme is disrupted. So the interventions that are necessary in these times must be put in place. But on the moral side, moving forward in post-disaster employment arrangements, what is fundamental is the continuing access of the workers to Social Security as a matter of right.
What about you, sir? Because, yes, Ms. Carreza.
Well, just like the country director of ILO who said that, IOM, before he came to the Philippines, he didn't have white hair. Before Yolanda, I used to have full hair. But I think social protection is very important. But in the experience of PhilHealth and Yolanda, it was different. We actually thought about kicking in protection. We were no longer thinking about membership and collections when it came to Haiyan. It was a really, really difficult situation back then. What we did was we kicked in what we called as an interim reimbursement mechanism, or otherwise, there's nobody from COA here, so I'm not allowed to say advance payment, but we paid in advance all the hospitals, or almost all the hospitals who asked for it. And I think the best thing that happened to health insurance, or in the aftermath of Yolanda, is the policy that we called, well, I'm not supposed to say this, but all can avail. So everybody in Eastern Visayas can avail of their PhilHealth benefits, whether they're members or not. So that's the best thing that happened. That's what I'm saying. When disaster comes in, let's not talk about membership or collection, let's talk about benefits and putting those benefits on the ground.
And did the disaster actually increase, eventually increase, I mean, after the response period, did it actually encourage others to also avail?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. Actually, after we gave the benefits even to non-members, it actually triggered a 100% increase in collections. So maybe the adage that says if you give it, you will receive is actually true. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir, Attorney Abad. Perhaps you can share
on the
with
part
us,
of the employers,
yes, from the point of view
as
of the
far
employer.
as the employers are concerned, they should comply with all the laws on labor standards, whether there's a disaster or none. Like paying SSS premiums, PhilHealth, Pag-ibig, minimum wage, incentive law, the 13th month pay law, the overtime pay, all the rest. So there has got to be a mechanism to monitor whether or not employers are complying with all of this. As a matter of fact, under our present law, it is the regional director of the Department of Labor who is supposed to see to it that labor standards are complied with by employers. However, these compliance officers that go around would rather close their eyes for some consideration. And so it comes about that many of our employers do not actually comply with some of the laws on labor standards, more particularly when it comes to the payment of minimum wage. That is why it is necessary that there must be regulations or even a law that should make it very difficult for employers not to comply by, say, imposing stiff penalties. Like if a business does not comply with the labor minimum wage law, then their license should be confiscated, so they'll not be able to go into business anymore. And perhaps even criminalize the non-compliance of labor standards. That way, our employers would be encouraged, let's put it this way, to encourage compliance with labor laws. As far as our members in the ECOP is concerned, we make it a point always to remind our members to comply with labor standards. And I'm happy to report to you that all of our members, more than 100 of them, comply with labor laws.
Congratulations. May I just have a follow-up on that? Since we're discussing, you've already raised the issue of vulnerability of workers. How did the Haiyan incident encourage also employers, members or not members of ECOP, to focus on their workers, not just because it's a cost from their business point of view, but actually as an investment, so that when incidents like this, when disasters like this do occur, their employers are, they stay alive, they become loyal afterwards, and they have access to social protection before, after, during the incident itself.
Well, for example, IMO, IOM, at least they have started it, insofar as compliance with labor laws are concerned, the minimum wage, they have started it in Leyte. And according to Mayor Remigio, the workers are now looking forward to for the compliance, and whenever they work, they want to be paid at least minimum wage. The way I look at it, if only it is monitored very closely, there will be compliance.
We'll go to ASEC Cabrera first before Governor Petilla, because essentially we'd like to make his own experience, on-the-ground experience, a highlight of this exchange. But Assistant Secretary Cabrera, can you give us your perspective of, well, first of all, what happened, what you did during the incident itself, the response, and then what happened afterwards, and perhaps you can also give us some bits of the lessons from this particular disaster.
Okay, thank you. And Governor Petilla will later on pick up and defend all of us. Anyway, Typhoon Haiyan or Yolanda presented to us the worst and the best of what the Philippines is and what the population is. Okay, worse in terms of the physical, emotional, and psychological damage impacted on the population affected, and also in terms of the resources that it requires to fully recover. But the best in terms of how the Philippines presented to the world, how it protected the population using the social protection as an overall safeguard for the population affected. Talking about the components of social protection, labor market, social safety net, and social welfare, there were lots of these being implemented, being felt and experienced and received by the people in the different areas affected. For the government, supported by the international humanitarian partners, particularly for livelihood and employment, will IOM, well anyway, ILO. ILO had been our partner when in fact it had caused ILO GIF. You know, it had influenced the passage of some policies, not only at the national level, which had been adopted earlier to safeguard the employment and even the conduct by which cash for work are being implemented on the ground. Also in terms of the conditional cash transfer that the government had been implementing, and supported by UNICEF and the UN World Food Program, we have the top-up cash to ensure the accessibility or accessing the services of both private and government to the family beneficiaries of the Pantawid Pamilya so that their rights and their well-being are assured by the top-up cash or the support coming from the other partners, particularly in providing for the immediate needs. No? The shelter and other recovery inputs came later on, but at the early stage, the top-up cash had really been helpful in terms of ensuring that the poorest of the poor, the marginalized, who are basically the beneficiaries also of Pantawid, are able to purchase their procuring capacity, their purchasing capacity had been enhanced with that. For the provincial, another good thing that Yolanda presented to us is that of the efforts made, implemented by the local government units that despite their resource scarcity and even the, the expertise, majority of its or their manpower had also been adversely affected by Yolanda, but there they were. They're in the midst of the implementation of the different interventions under social protection, particularly at the height of humanitarian response, bringing together partners, actors that would carry on and expand the work that the local government and the national governments had been doing.
Okay. Let's go to Governor Petilla, who was on the ground, and we've seen how you were during the days following the disaster. Can you share with us your experience in making sure that your constituents had access to, I mean, not days after, but at least eventually, how important it was for your constituents to have been already to have access to the social protection, the social mechanism of the government, of the different groups that are trying to help you, and mostly, what is your biggest lesson from that disaster? I'm sure you've had. It's been what, almost 2 years since the disaster, so we'd like to hear from you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Basically, to me, my biggest lesson is the lesson that the people has taught us, no other than the resiliency of the constituents, basically. They actually helped. No? They were not just victims, but they were also the initial rescue that on D-Day itself. I could not find policemen because their families were also victims. I couldn't find any government offices because the government offices were destroyed. So we relied on what we have, no, the people, and they volunteered, they helped. Especially on the first part, they didn't even demanded for pay. No, we asked them to drive our trucks because we had trucks, but the drivers were not able to report. So some things like that. So the emergency, carrying the wounded, carrying the dead. Basically, these were mostly done not by trained rescue people who were not yet there on D-Day, but really the people. That's why we wanted to build more resiliency on the people. And going back to your earlier question about vulnerability, I think the most vulnerable people are the people that are not actually usually covered by ILO or IOM, whatever. No? ILO, it's labor. It's about labor. But the most vulnerable people are those that are not employed. So normally, for example, we have PhilHealth. Part of the PhilHealth the premium is paid by the employers, right? But these are unemployed. Yeah, so we have SSS. No? But these are employed. These are the most vulnerable people. And if we characterize, we talk about livelihood. No, parang it's easy to talk about livelihood, easy to talk about production. No, but actually that is the biggest challenge now for Leyte, no, the livelihood. How can we make it sustainable? For example, if we do training now on livelihood, can we say that 2 years from now, 5 years from now, the lives are much better of the beneficiaries? That's the most challenging part right now on the livelihood area. So if we do livelihood effectively, we have to understand first the beneficiary, the characteristics of the beneficiary or the community. No? Normally, as I said, it's the unemployed and the poorest of the poor, the poorest communities. No? So how do you characterize the poorest community? Because there's a reason why they are poor. No, there is all you have to do is understand why they are poor and then tackle it from there. No? These are the characteristics. No? High, low productivity or almost nil. No? High malnutrition rate, these communities. So even the parents that we have trained, that we have hired on a cash for work program or something like that, the parents who has like 10 children, no, these parents grew up malnourished, no, in the past, and it's very difficult to educate somebody who has been malnourished, basically. And then, of course, if you cannot educate them, how can they hire them? No, the ECOP, how can they hire them? The employers. So that's one, no? Malnutrition, dropout rates are high because, again, of malnutrition. No? Enrollment in universities is almost nil, especially in these barangays. They have very vulnerable and that's experience in the past on armed conflict, peace and order problems, no? High maternal death rates. No? So you name it, no? It's all there. That's the reason why they are poor. And we talk about livelihood, we talk about entrepreneurship. So the challenge now is these kind of people that we just characterized, how do we make them entrepreneurs? Diba? Where most of the government, for example, the government or the NGOs, most of the government NGOs teaching them to be entrepreneurs are themselves not entrepreneurs. Because if these people in government are entrepreneurs, they will not be in government. They're doing business in Makati now. They're having their business now. So again, that's a challenge. That's a challenge. That's why, how do we make them productive? No, I hope we can answer it in this forum also. Okay.
Okay, may I just remind the audience that you can raise your hand if you have any burning questions even while the discussion in the panel is going on. Okay, talk about burning questions. We have one now. May we ask you to state your name?
Yes, Antonis Malagaris from GIZ. I would like to build on what Governor Petilla told us here. It's very important. We have also a joint program on reconstruction ongoing with you, with your support. We hope we will be able to share some results very soon, also this year, with your help. Now, the issue is about awareness. I believe that Mr. Petilla also is pointing to the awareness issue. We need to raise awareness about risk protection. We cannot leave to the government, any government, even German government. If the people who are not aware of insurance, they would not buy so much insurance. The same in Switzerland. They're aware about that. It's not compulsory. Some insurance is compulsory, but the other is about awareness of risk. The other side is how much insurance costs. Insurance in the Philippines, it's said, is only for the rich. It's only for those in Makati, right? Or for vehicle insurance, obligatory insurance. This is not true. It's not only for the rich. So it's about insurance. So in other words, I'm not talking about the poorest of the poor. They still need help, relief, etc. For those who can still save 50 pesos or 100 pesos a month, there are various ways of investing that. As a saving, they can buy, of course, a better house, better education for their children, but they also can buy some insurance. And this is where the government of the Philippines has done a great job, Department of Finance, Insurance Commission, I think. By the way, there are 28 million Filipinos who have an insurance. Very few people know that. It's worldwide, it's the first country in terms of population. It's almost 30% of the population. India has more, but has also much more population. So this is important, and see how many of these policies they receive cover disaster. As I said before, most of the insurance companies, they don't cover disaster, right? They say, no, forget it. But if you tell them, I only need you to cover up to 5,000 pesos, right? They may say, oh, okay, can we make it 2,500? Fine. Yeah, but this is the way to go out. And second, reinsurance. Reinsurance is there, to spread over the portfolio, all over the world. That's their role there. But they also need to be included in the discussion. So I think this is a very good panel, but I would maybe suggest that maybe also the private sector could sit here, an association of insurance companies of the Philippines. It's one of the most growing, so to say, business in the Philippines. Also in ASEAN now context, they start being very aggressive in it with their products. So I think social protection should be also complemented by the role of the private sector for the low income with the right products and the right awareness behind it. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Perhaps those from SSS and PhilHealth would like to share some of their thoughts.
Yeah. Before even private interventions be considered, let us emphasize the social security or the social insurance offered by the social security system. So I think we have very affordable rates already. The minimum contribution is 110 pesos a month. And I think awareness is now being done through partnerships with various community groups and cooperatives or members of the cooperatives, because in the present administration, the coverage of the informal sector workers, the overseas workers, the vulnerable sector has been a priority or a major thrust of the social security system. So instead of going retail in covering the self-employed workers or the informal sector workers, we have partnered with various informal sector groups, cooperatives, microfinance institutions in providing coverage through registration or collection of contributions through these organizations in bringing their members under the social protection, under the social security program. So I think we have enough coverage, but information, I think, is dissemination can be more given emphasis. I think your question a while ago about the response, immediate response during disasters, I think it was a challenge for us in the Social Security because even our employees in the branch where the disaster was were victims of the calamity. I think the lesson there was that we were able to institutionalize the standard response when it comes to disasters, like flexibility in policies, in documentation requirements because they lost their documents or other supporting documents. And then the ability of the nearest branch who can take over and set up mobile action centers at the place of disaster. and the coordination with other government agencies like DSWD, DOLE, and the local government units. That was important. But first of a kind during the Haiyan calamity or disaster was that partnership and collaboration with ILO. This is actually first of a kind in the sense that during the emergency employment activities, where workers or emergency workers were hired, they ensured that principles of decent work were adhered to. And this includes subsidy of social security contributions of the emergency workers. This is first of a kind for us. And I think this has to be part and parcel of the response during disasters because the employers are not able to provide the minimum wage and the social security contributions during these times. And this is where government has to make some appropriations that in times of disasters like this, that social protection or social security contributions must be maintained or continued. Suspended on the part of the employers or the affected persons, but this is where national government can come in, subsidizing the social security contributions, like what we did with the ILO subsidy. So there was this grant funded by international communities that was provided for the emergency workers, which included coverage under the Social Security and PhilHealth.
I would like to add, no? I think Mr. Walter here, he's the reason why the provincial hospitals or the 12 hospitals that the province of Leyte is operated, it's kind of overcrowded, no? Because PhilHealth, right after the typhoon, said that everybody, members or not members, everybody are covered. Anybody who goes, for as long as he looks Filipino. No, so everybody is covered. Everybody's covered, and you know one thing about disaster, especially Haiyan, no? The minute Haiyan struck, right after, no, we've noticed that pregnant mothers gave birth right after the typhoon, even those who are not scheduled yet to give birth, no? Because of the trauma and stress. And 9 months after the typhoon, again, the hospitals were crowded, no? And because PhilHealth has decided, and we have a policy also in our hospitals that giving birth, they don't pay anything, no, to the hospital. That's why probably it's also our fault that many mothers are giving more birth, more babies. So that was a very big help to us in Leyte. In 2013, before the typhoon, the 12 hospitals, we had more or less, we took in around 400,000 patients. Last year, after the typhoon, it has increased to 530,000 patients. And so far, on the first quarter of the year, I was only looking at the revenue. On the other hand, there was also a significant increase on the revenue from PhilHealth. It means that I think there's another significant increase in the number of patients for 2015 on these hospitals. That was very important because, you know, a lot of people really need those. You know, after the typhoon, what we needed were people who knows how to stitch wounds, because that was the most common injuries, no? Stitching of the wounds. So a lot of them were not able to get that service right away because the hospitals were also damaged, no? But later on, they were able to get services from our surgeons because PhilHealth has covered the expenses for that, no? So that's one of very important. And on the DSWD, I think Yusek did not mention also the Kalahi Seeds program. Kalahi Seeds is a community-driven project, Okay? So the constituents will decide. They will have a huge meeting. All people in the barangay will decide what are their priorities. And then once they decide they will build this, then DSWD come in, the province come in, the municipal government come in. Even the barangay will pitch in our funds, not to fund that project. And then the constituents will implement, will build that project. One thing we noticed about after the typhoon, after Haiyan, the ones that were very organized in responding, the communities, were the beneficiaries of Kalahi. Because they got used to volunteerism. No, they've gotten used to working together with their neighbors. No? So doon sa rescue, pagdala ng mga, the emergency services, they also help in the emergency services. No? I think that was the key to our survival as well. Because it was a recovery driven also by the constituents. No? So I think I will have to emphasize again that for us, the provincial government, the LGUs, no, the concern, our most important concern right now, are those that are unemployed, rather than those that are employed. Although there is a concern also on the employment, because again, as I think the representative from Tacloban City mentioned earlier, no, businesses in Tacloban were destroyed, and Tacloban is the center of the economy of the region. Many of my constituents works in Tacloban who lost their job also after the typhoon. So there's concern, no? But again, we have to emphasize really on the most vulnerable first.
Talking about social protection and disasters, what was very peculiar is that after Yolanda, even if we announced that everybody, you don't need membership, you can avail, still, membership in the self-employed sector or the informal economy raised at unprecedented level. In fact, I just checked, it's 100%, 101%. So maybe the worst of times brings the best in people. People were thinking now, I get to get my insurance, I have to pay it on my own, I'm not going to depend on government for my premium. I think that's what happened in Eastern Visayas. And of course, our soldier, I'm also very proud of our workers in PhilHealth Region 8. We were the first to open. Since the PhilHealth building is made of glass, the front is made of glass, and when 15 feet of water came rushing in, it broke the glass, and we could not close it. So therefore, we were the first to open.
Okay, the jokes just keep on coming. Ms. Cabrera, would you like to add?
Just two things, and let me add. It's a very good question coming from GTZ. Where's that gentleman? Actually, there's an ongoing discussions at the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, because in truth, good for those who are employed because they're protected by other GSIS or the SSS. Good for those who are poor or near poor because they're covered and are employed because they're covered by the PhilHealth. But the issue really, the real issue are those for the non-employed and those who cannot pay their insurance premiums. We have partnered with small insurance groups for the Remansi. This is the risk management insurance, but not all will be able to or are able to dedicate some income or some amount for their insurance. So this is a real issue at the national level. How can we help these people, the poor and the unemployed, so that they'll be protected whenever disaster strikes? Second thing, let me add to what the gentleman governor from Leyte had mentioned. The need had driven the people, and that their needs, the community-driven development approach, emphasize on what the people or the capacity that people can do to help in the recovery. At the early stage, we thought that it might not be possible because they're victims and they consider themselves as incapable. But later on, using the community-driven development, and by the way, sorry to mention this GIF, were supported by the Japanese government and ADB for community-driven development projects, so that we're able to cover several municipalities in Leyte and Samar for CDD. But the CDD had really increased the resiliency and the coping capacity of people and communities. So we noted that while they are not insured, in terms of building again their shelter units, even those who are not included in the emergency shelter assistance, they're being able to reconstruct not only their shelter units, but also the community facilities, very important facilities that would link them to the roads, to water supply or even power supply, that the people had on their own repaired or reconstructed. So the Haiyan experience that we have in Samar Leyte had really brought insight that the center and the core factor that could move recovery and rehabilitation are really the disaster or the displaced population themselves, with the support coming from the local government unit, the national and the international humanitarian and development partners. Thank you.
Lots of moving parts, lots of personalities and groups involved. But I think this particular question has raised the fact that there are actually social programs, health programs in place, and it exposes those who are not part of the program before the disaster strikes. And it actually increases their awareness once that event actually happened. So we have another question from the floor. Can you please identify yourself?
Again, Alan Monreal of Damgo. This is actually in response to Governor Petilla's question or dilemma about malnutrition. I totally agree with that. How do you teach entrepreneurship to an intellectually challenged person who was malnourished during his grown-up years? It is really hard, doubly hard if you're dealing with individuals. So our strategy was we organized them and we guided them every step of the way. And we have a program that is actually happening now as we speak. Yeah? So we were able to secure funding for a 60,000 pesos community resource center for the People's Organization, and of course made of earth blocks. Now the agreement is that they will be under stewardship by DAMGO for a full year. They gotta have commercial activity. The resource center will be used for business, for social, cultural, and even a safe haven for typhoon. So again, it should be community driven. Let's not deal with individuals. There's more power in numbers, and it's not totally lost. But of course, being an entrepreneur is not for everyone, but the idea is to give them the opportunity, and there are a lot of tools like the seabed that is available, and we've proven that that it can be done, and it's making a difference. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, ma'am?
Good afternoon, Susanita. Walter. Susanita Tishorna for Alliance of Workers in the Informal Economy, TUCP. I'm so happy to see favorite partners here from SCCS, Walter, ECOP, and Yusik Vilma from the Kalahi SID. So mahaba na ho yung, we have a long way already to reach into the level of creating our social protection framework. And I'm glad that social protection framework are here. This morning there was the Department of Labor. So if we try to mention, there is the safety nets addressed by led by DSWD, and then employment generation led by DOLI, and then we have social protection for PhilHealth, SSS, and Pag-ibig. But I'm very happy that, I'm so glad that the governor, I have the same line of thinking with him. Since early this morning, I asked already the issue of sustainability. And with this livelihood, although it's very awkward for me to see that the typhoon creates opportunity for all of us. Creates opportunity to develop more programs that are really responsive to the needs of this typhoon or whatever calamities we have. And then not only for that, also for the other parts or other types of workers who have not been responded or addressed. For example, the question of the Honorable Governor. How will you make it sustainable? The qualities, the kind of people that you make it. In a very long years in my advocacy, collaborating with the government, I was always asking, how many of those thousands of entrepreneurs you trained that have really the managerial capacity? Only few of them have the managerial capacity. And I'm glad with the mention of organizing them, finding who are those leaders who can manage a business. All the rest, for all we know, all the others that we train would likely to remain or are keen only to be workers. So I'm glad, of course, I will not be mistaken this time to associate Jeff with IOM, but it is ILO. With the present, with the ILO, the ILO conference of 2015, that's the 104th ILO conference, brings forth a landmark instrument for the informal economy, which we call recommendation number 204. And one of the programs that has been proposed there, it will help, I think will help, or I'm sure will help address the issue of the governor and our issue as informal economy workers, the social and solidarity economy. We have the social entrepreneurs, but we have to add, social and solidarity economy takes two kinds of economy. The first economy that is dealt with that is that those who have the capacity to manage, and those who have the capacity to link, to access resources, etc., and to market spatially. And then the second economy that's spoken about there is the working class. And I think it expresses the Philippine position on how to develop sustainable enterprises, and that's one. And the other is our partner from the ECOP mentioned about the unemployed. I think it's not even the problem with who is the unemployed. More of the problems that we have identified are really those in the informal economy workers in the formal workplaces. It's not only the vendors, it's not only the self-employed. But when we talk about informal economy workers, they are both in the formal and informal economy. Meaning those, for example, the Kentex, for example, as an example. How many are in the formal establishment? It is a formal establishment, but how many are enrolled as workers? Registered as workers. Most of them are piece rates. And how many of them are not even included in our programs, how to respond to that in terms of social protection? There are the statistics in the NSO. It's about 96.4 something percent of the total establishments are in these micro and small establishments. And for that, you can just imagine how large or how big is the number of these workers that has been excluded from our services. And I put forward this as a challenge, not only for the calamities, but as a challenge to all social protection providers. SSS, look for them, where are they? ECOP, they should look at those, especially those in the Camber, the small companies that are not your members. I hope ECOP can help with them. Educate them. That is their moral responsibility, labor responsibility, social responsibility to the workers to enroll them in social protection. And I think that relates closely to the big one we are talking here. Where is the big one? We're in Manila. If the biggest number of establishments that are having informal economy workers are in the National Capital Region, and according to the NSO, census establishments, then there is really a big problem in a big event.
Okay, which brings us to perhaps your issue, which is basically decent work in between disasters. I mean, we've had Haiyan previously, and then another one perhaps.
The big one, and everyday lives of the people. They're always at risk.
Okay, let's perhaps take it from the point of, take the perspective of Attorney Abad on the issues that were pointed out.
Insofar as the statistics are concerned, 94%, that's SMEs. These are the small scale and medium scale industries. The big industries, they constitute, say, more than 2%. And then the barangay, the micro, these are the ones which should be attended to. These are the barangay, these are the industries put up by barangay units. So, but the SMEs are registered with PhilHealth, with SSS, with the Pag-ibig. They're all registered. As a matter of fact, the law requires mandatorily for the employers to register all of their employees. Otherwise, the employers, there is a penalty there, which includes not only fine, but also a jail term. No? That's why I'm a little bit surprised when I just heard that about 94% are not covered. They are covered. Now, so as whether it is our duty to the ECOP, this is the duty of ECOP to really impose upon these employers to register them, well, it is our duty insofar as the members of ECOP are concerned. But the Employers' Confederation is not the only one that exists. You have Management Association of the Philippines, you have the PCCI. Not all of them are members of ECOP. So as far as our members are concerned, I said, I'm happy to report that they are all compliant with labor standards laws.
If I may just add, this brings to fore the question of who are covered by the social security system. I think under the law, coverage of an employee starts from the first day of employment. So whether they are registered or reported for coverage under the SSS or not, they are covered. But the question is, in case of eventualities like the Kentix, if they are not registered or not reported for SSS coverage, then it's the employer's liability. So in these particular cases that workers face this disaster and then they are found to be not reported, then it is the responsibility of the employer to pay for the damages in terms of benefits due, at the same time penalties and whatever, imprisonment if ever found guilty. So I think they are covered. So I think the major question is still the non-workers or those who are not employed. Where is Social Security, or how do we fund Social Security for the unemployed or for those who are not employed? That is, I think, the major problem. And I think if we have had provisions for the Philippine health insurance for the indigent sector, I think it is about time that government thinks of funding also Social Security for the very poor, the non-workers. So it's funding so that it is not just like the social pensions that they have now, that those who have no pensions under the SSS or GSIS are given 500 pesos. But how do you make it sustainable? By making contributions now before they reach retirement or a contingency occurs. I think it's about time that we put some allocation for also Social Security, not only health insurance, for the very poor and those who are not employed.
I think it has been declared that 95% of Filipinos are covered already with PhilHealth. So when disaster strikes, the problem is the 5%. So the answer there is, well, it became 95%, by the way, because of the sin tax bill. The sin tax are now paying premium for the poor. Mm-hmm. But if you're smoking and drinking, please drink and smoke some more. So the 5% that will get sick and does not have health insurance will be covered by the all can avail if, God forbid, it will hit Manila. And I can just imagine, my God, the amount it will really. I don't want to compute it because I don't want to see it.
Perhaps.
Okay, I also want to add. Again,
Okay.
I think it's the fault of PhilHealth why ECOP cannot catch up with the job creation, because a lot of babies are born because PhilHealth is paying it for free. No, so So I think really we have to, that's right, no? We need to, there is lack of available jobs, no? Especially for these people who do not qualify, no? The malnourished, people who grew up malnourished, not educated, something like that, they will not qualify with the jobs that our companies are offering, even government are offering. No? They will not qualify. No? So we need to make them entrepreneurs. How do we do that? I think we have to, the community, we have to do a lot of things. Firstly, really, it's mostly on the human development. No? I think they are still people. We can still develop them. No? We can develop good values. We can develop the skills. PhilHealth, in partnership with PhilHealth, we provide them as much as possible with the health needs that kailangan nila. No? Tapos, of course, yung education. And then, once it's there, and then put in the livelihood. Put in the livelihood, and then once it's there, you have, I wouldn't say super people, no? Pero somebody who is capable of producing things that we can teach, that we can guide, no? So now, for example, Mayor Ang of San Isidro, we had one there in Barangay Dahadako. No, we have done that program there, and in Barangay Kapinyahan, also in the same town, on the orchid production. So right now, these barangays are selling lots of things because we guide them. We not only teach them the livelihood, not only the values, not only, we even do training on disaster. We train them with protection of women and children against violence, against trafficking. No, we teach them on nutrition. What are the major causes of malnutrition in Leyte, which is primarily common worm. So we do all of this in one place, and then turn them into, I hope, Superman. No, no matter what disasters comes in. No, there's one barangay in Haro. This used to be a war zone during martial law. This is a war zone of insurgency. They used to have 4 or 5% birth rate. As of last year, I think, the report last year I got, it went down to 0.9%, the birth rate. No? The houses, they were fixing their houses. No? From a normal 15% concrete or semi-concrete houses, they're now, 62% of their houses are already concrete. No? So it's them the one building. No? It's them the one building because we came in with the livelihood. We helped them. It's not a dole out. Huh? We set up a business that they are the ones running. No, a business talaga. And then with all the education, the values, the trainings, everything. And some of them are buying pickups already, pickup trucks, kahit mga second hand, to bring their goods, no, to the market. No? They do sell, they can sell. They have never complained that they were not able to sell all their harvests. No? So we have seen a lot of improvements. This barangay started 2 years before Haiyan. And 3 days after Yolanda, they started planting. No assistance, no seeds has been given to them, no cash has been given to them. No cash because actually they have already an account of 1 million pesos sa bank account nila, no, out of their livelihood. No, tapos no seeds. They are very far, so they were the last ones to be reached. But 3 days they were able to plant petchay, tangkong, the one that can be sold in 1 month. And by December they were the only ones selling those things. Tapos ang mahal pa, no? Ang taas ng demand. People were willing to pay 200 pesos for a kilo of pichay. And people had money. Thanks to Chuchi, thanks to Red Cross, thanks to the NGOs who gave them money. No? So those are the things that we want them to be. No? They became resilient. Even sa business, in their business, they have become resilient. No? I always tell people, imagine Mayor Ang is the mayor of the municipality of Forbes Park. I don't know, everybody probably knows Forbes Park. I think if you're the mayor of that, or if it's a municipality, if you're mayor, what will you fix? You talk about disaster, these houses cannot be destroyed by Yolanda. No, so I think they're fine. No? You talk about health. No? They go to the best hospitals because they're rich. No? You talk about education. Their children are studying in Stanford. No? So there's no really, we don't need to put up a scholarship program in that place. No? So we don't have a infrastructure. Wala tayong problema. Because these people, this community is rich. No? I think we have to move into that direction. No? It will probably be it sounds impossible, no? For these poor people there in the barrios. Gawin nating parang Forbes Park. It sounds impossible. But, we believe in God. He is perfect. We are not perfect, but we still attempt to follow Him. No, I think it's just setting the direction. No? So I hope whoever are here, let's work together to work towards that same direction. And I think we can achieve it. We can make people more resilient. We can make them less vulnerable. And we can make them more protected. If we can achieve these goals. There are already goals achieved, but we need to achieve more goals para sa kanila.
Which actually brings us to the close of this panel. You hit the right words there, actually. How to bring the vulnerable who are exposed when incidents like Haiyan happens to a place where they are no longer vulnerable. And we've discussed so far a lot of case studies of communities working together to help those who have been affected rebuild themselves. We've learned about this mechanisms in government and as far as memberships in organizations like ECOP are concerned. But obviously disasters are inevitable, especially in the Philippines. There's a big one coming, perhaps. And yet, I think we need to keep on discussing the lessons of Yolanda because it was the worst that we've experienced so far. And we've heard case studies also of how it brought out the best in a lot of us, in cases of social protection, gaining more memberships, and so many things. But I think, yes, if there's, aside from the IOMs and the other jokes that came out from today, if there's one thing that we can bring home with us is to not stop talking about the lessons from Haiyan. So on that note, may I call on the organizers to help us close. Thank you very much again to our panelists, and I hope you all have enough.
Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, colleagues and participants, thank you for the lively and interesting panel discussions. My thanks especially to the panelists and to our moderators and of course to the audience for your participation and for your interesting questions. This culminating event has been an opportunity for the ILO and I hope for the participants, for the audience here, to learn from the experience of the past 1.5 years of work and to see a way forward in providing sustainable livelihood assistance in a post-disaster situation. As we have seen from the first discussion with our friends from Japan, despite the different socio-economic situation of the two communities, there are still similarities and things that can be learned from each other to help improve the responses to natural disasters. Even in a developed country such as Japan, it takes time to recover, and 3 years after the disaster, people were still living in temporary housing. And I know people are still living in temporary housing in Tacloban and in other areas. The impact of the disaster on both of the communities here in the Philippines and in Japan was enormous, both communities also faced underlying economic challenges prior to the disasters. We all know that Leyte was not one of the most developed parts of the Philippines even before the disaster struck. However, the response and recovery can be an opportunity to influence policy and change things for the better. Some of the common goals that seem to be arising out from the first panel discussion, I mean, some of the things that I noted down as I was listening were that human power and working with community members of all ages for sustainable work who best know the recovery needs. Yeah? It's important to be working closely with communities. Then also it was mentioned that building back better than before. Of course, that's a key phrase that's been repeated many times in the Philippines, but also applies to the situation in Japan. And then it was also mentioned about how businesses can prepare for disasters and in the process of doing that include the community. Also we mentioned the importance of caring for the environment. And then lastly as well, something which I thought was very interesting was that, of course, having work, having employment helps the recovery process, but it's more than just about a salary. It's also about the culture that you're working in. It's about dialogue between employers and employees, and it's about personal growth. And it's about having a place to recover. Working is an opportunity, is a way that people can recover from the disaster as well. Working your way out of a disaster was a phrase the ILO used before, but it rings true in this situation as well. In the second discussion, where we focused on collaboration, it's clear that a sort of partnership approach is crucial. Every organization involved, from national and local governments, through NGOs, international organizations. Hang on, lost track of where I was there. Down to people's organizations and the communities themselves have a vital role to play in the recovery process. In our response, the ILO worked with over 90 different organizations on more than 150 sub-projects. I think in the materials you were given, there was just a small sample. And in some of those projects, we had multiple partners, each bringing a different skill set and contributions to the table. Combining the ILO's focus on labor-intensive and decent work with other partners to access to materials, land, and expertise enabled the ILO to spread the funding from the donors much more widely. Along with the $11.5 million of funding that we received from the donors that was mentioned before, through the collaborative approach, we were able to combine this with over $2.6 million of assistance from our partners in the sub-projects that we did. In our work with the Early Recovery and Livelihood cluster, the ILO has championed decent work and minimum wages for emergency response workers. Through good coordinated working practices and strong working partnerships during the recovery process, the ILO has not only been able to influence policy and reinforce existing national laws on workers' rights, but I would be the first to admit that we've also learned a great deal from our partners, and this will influence the way the ILO responds to disasters in the future. In the discussion, it was pointed out that we can never be over-prepared, yeah? And that governance should be anticipatory, right down to empowering the people at the POROC level. Haiyan has been a huge lesson on how organizations can work and bring resources together. There's been an incredible willingness of organizations to work together. There's been good coordination, and the response, as was mentioned in the discussion, could be considered a heroic period in the history of the Philippines. Even so, there could still be a full-time coordinating organization in the government to respond to disasters, as was mentioned. Days of study are needed to draw out the lessons of Haiyan. We only have a day and a half, half a day today, so that's not too much. But following the disaster is a real opportunity for reflection, and there can be more discussion on how cash works, scientific approaches, mapping, faster mobilization, and information sharing. There is so much more to discuss. It's a pity we don't have longer. In our third discussion, we focused on social protection. And despite the challenges, and I would be the first to admit that we have had challenges with the social protection enrollment, it's clear that everyone agrees on the importance of social security and health insurance for workers. Over the past 1.5 years, the ILO has had a great opportunity to work closely with SSS and PhilHealth, and I personally am really grateful for their flexibility and for the way we've managed to work in such a good collaborative way together. And through that partnership, we've managed to extend coverage to all of the people we worked with who are affected by Haiyan in line with national policy. When you hear about some stories of people who have benefited from this coverage, there's no question as to the benefit of this kind of insurance and social security. Take, for example, one beneficiary farmer in San Isidro who suffered from swollen kidneys and had to be hospitalized. But because he had worked with the ILO and he had PhilHealth coverage, half of his bills were covered, and later he regained his strength and continued to work on his farm. And there are many examples like that where people really have benefited from that kind of support. The majority of the people that the ILO has worked with, though, have never had the opportunity to benefit from this kind of coverage before. They've never been enrolled in SSS or PhilHealth before. But despite the economic challenges, because although the contributions are small, many people can't afford to pay them that regularly. Despite that, most people that we've worked with and discussed with say they will continue to make contributions after the initial input. They will continue to stay enrolled in SSS and PhilHealth. The panel noted that, particularly, that Social Security is mandatory for all workers, and that after a disaster, though a challenge, it's key that benefits on the ground can be quickly availed of. I think we all understand that having the coverage is very important, but being able to quickly access that and being confident that if you had to go to hospital that you would be covered is very important for people to understand that, and there is much more work that could be done on that. Compliance of employers with labour standards also needs to be encouraged, as I was just discussing. We need stronger enforcement for that. But we do need to emphasise that the most vulnerable are those who are not conventionally employed. It's those who are instead self-employed. I wouldn't say unemployed. Everybody does some kind of work. Everybody has to have some kind of income to support their family, so I would say self-employed. But those people, the majority of the people that we worked with, and the people who are most affected by Typhoon Haiyan, they don't have employers to enroll them in the social protection. So we do need to do more work on raising awareness of the risks and the possible insurance products that they could get access to, so that we can bring them into a place where they're no longer vulnerable. Although we have all worked hard for the past 1.5 years, I think everybody would admit that this is only the beginning. As was mentioned in the opening remarks, over 2.6 million vulnerable workers lost their livelihoods as a result of Typhoon Haiyan. Since the disaster struck, the international community and the government has made an incredible effort to help the communities back on the path of sustainable development and long-term recovery. Overall, the ILO has provided assistance to over 30,000 individuals with a direct impact on over 150,000 people. With our partners, we've helped to rebuild schools, clear debris, clear irrigation canals, rebuild health facilities, and we've worked with farmers on environmentally sustainable farming technologies. And we've also provided skills through our work with Tester to over 5,000 people. And we invested more than $3.3 million of the funding we received into the local economy through the payment of wages direct to workers. So that was around a third of the money that we received went directly to workers for their wages. The strategic response plan of the humanitarian country team it targeted 136,000 individuals needing livelihood assistance, and they actually assisted more than 160,000. Thousands more, of course, since then, since the strategic response plan closed, have been assisted by the government, by private agencies, and by civil society. As part of our efforts to maintain the inroads, the progress made on understanding the crucial need to adhere to national policy and international law on decent work and labour rights, the ILO, in partnership with our colleagues of Save the Children and Oxfam, we plan soon to launch a media campaign. The campaign will aim to increase the demand and supply for decent work, by which we mean, of course, social protection, minimum wage, occupational safety and health in disaster and conflict-stricken areas, and we will target both workers and employers in the Haiyan affected areas in Leyte and northern Cebu and in Coron. The campaign that we're planning will address workers in both rural and urban settings, and we will aim to promote and increase compliance amongst employers and perhaps guide workers to be a bit more discerning in choosing their employers if they do have that relationship. The campaign will highlight the cycle of benefit exchange that comes with decent work, the point being that it benefits employers if their workers are paid properly. They get more productive work. So I would like now to close the event by giving my thanks to our colleagues and partners in the great efforts that have been made in the past year and a half. I would like to express my personal thanks to the ILO staff, both in the national office and in the field, to our key partners, the national and regional and local government agencies, to the local and international organizations that collaborated with us, and of course to the good work that we've done with the people affected by the typhoon. My special thanks also goes to the ILO team for the hard work in organizing the event today. I think it went very smoothly. Thank you very much. And finally, of course, our gratitude goes to our donors, to the International Maritime Employers Council, and to the Japanese, Norwegian, and the British governments. Thank you very much.